One era, two women, two polar opposites, Marilyn Monroe, the American beauty, and Audrey Hepburn, a sophisticated European girl. A platinum blonde and a slender brunette, both beautiful and extraordinarily talented, were the brightest personalities at their time in the 20th century film industry and became pop culture phenomenon in the 21st. How did it happen that two completely different actresses, whose characters carried opposite messages, have so much in common? What is their mystery? Spoiler alert, both were John Kennedy's mistresses. On June 1, 1926 in LA, a girl was born and christened Norma Jean Mortensen, who after a couple of decades, the whole world will recognize as Marilyn Monroe. For the parents, this was not a joyful event. The father, Charles, was just divorced, did not intend to start a family, and having learned about the pregnancy, disappeared. The mother, Gladys Monroe, by that time had 2 unsuccessful marriages and 2 children, whom she left with her ex-husband. The newborn girl was given the name Norma Jean. That was her name for the first 20 years of her life. Her mother, in some documents, indicated the name of her husband, Baker. In other documents, the second husband's surname is Martinson. The surname of the real father of Norma Jean did not appear anywhere. Audrey was born on May 4, 1929 in the capital of Belgium, Brussels, into a cosmopolitan and aristocratic family. Her mother, Baroness Ella van Heemstra, was one of Dutch descent, and her father, banker Joseph Hepburn, was of English and Austrian descent. At the same time, the ancestors of Audrey's mother were French nobles and English civil servants. Audrey had 2 maternal half-brothers, Alexander and Jan van Uffert, from Ella's first marriage. Just like Marilyn, Audrey Hepburn isn't her real name. Audrey's real name was Audrey Kathleen Ruston. In 1940, she started to go by Ada van Heemstra because it was at the same time of the Second World War and having an English-sounding name was dangerous when in Europe. Eventually, she changed her name to Audrey Hepburn, and that was the name we all came to know. Audrey was only 6 years old when her parents divorced, and the girl left with her mother for London. Ella van Heemstra wanted her daughter to get a decent education, so Audrey began attending a close private school for girls. They both overcame difficult childhoods and absent fathers. Marilyn Monroe, aged 12, Audrey Hepburn, aged 11. Marilyn Monroe spent her childhood in a series of foster homes and spent 2 years in an orphanage. Her mentally ill mother was institutionalized, and her father was unknown to her. She was placed in foster care at only 2 weeks old and had to witness her mother being led away after a psychotic breakdown. Growing up during the Great Depression, she recalls standing in line for day-old bread and having only one dress to wear to school, where she was ostracized for being an orphanage kid. While some of her guardians were kind to her, she has always maintained that she was abused both emotionally and physically during her childhood. Audrey Hepburn grew up during World War II in Holland, living in constant fear. Her father left the family early, absolutely devastating her, and she had to bear the Nazis killing her uncle and sending her stepbrother to a work camp. Food was so scarce that she sometimes couldn't keep up her dance lessons because she was so weak from hunger and later had permanent health issues from this period of malnutrition. As a teenager, she helped the resistance by carrying notes and messages hidden in socks. They both worked as models to make ends meet. Marilyn joined the Blue Book modeling agency in 1946, using her earnings to support herself and to continue working towards her goals of being an actress. Audrey starts modeling in 1948, using the money to help support her family and keep taking dance lessons. Both worked hard in small roles and parts before making it big. Marilyn in Dangerous Years in 1948, Audrey in The Lavender Hill Mob in 1951. Both took the film world by storm. Marilyn in Niagara in 1952, Audrey in Roman Holiday in 1953. Marilyn hit the filmdom and the world with 1952's Niagara. The impact she made was undeniable. She was suddenly everywhere, on magazine covers, newspapers, and was the girl everyone was talking about. Her style was emulated, and she was finally on her way to being the big star she was always dreaming of. Audrey becomes a household name with the 1953 release of Roman Holiday. Critics and fans find her irresistible, and her style filled fashion magazines. The film gets rave reviews, and Audrey is later nominated and wins a Best Actress Oscar for her role. Both were considered to play Holly Golightly in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Audrey Hepburn's Breakfast at Tiffany's role was originally written for Marilyn Monroe. The main character of Capote's story, Holly, bears an uncanny resemblance to Monroe. A small-town girl trying to break into showbiz, she changes her name from Lamy to Holly, just as Monroe changed her name from Norma Jean. Both Monroe and Holly spent time in orphanages during their Depression-era childhoods. Monroe was sexually abused at a young age, according to the New York Post. Holly also alludes to being molested as a child, dismissing, quote, anything that happened before I was 13, because after all, that just doesn't count. Interestingly, it was Monroe herself who turned down the part of Holly Golightly. The reason Marilyn did not take the part is because her advisor, an acting coach, said Marilyn should not be playing a lady of the evening. Monroe's image has always been hypersexual, while Hepburn's was more elegant and refined. This casting choice would have set a completely different tone for the character. Monroe's pivot to formal theatrical training in the mid-50s suggested her resistance to being typecast as a dumb blonde. She may have thought that Holly would play into her being typecast, but Hepburn's performance makes Holly appear anything but stupid. Both took care of estranged parents, Marilyn and Gladys Baker in 1933, Audrey and Joseph Rustin in 1960. Marilyn's mother, Gladys Baker, suffered from mental illness and was a mysterious and absent figure in her life. She was often institutionalized and did not have much of a relationship with her own daughter. Despite this, Marilyn continuously paid the bills for her care every month, appointed a guardian to oversee Gladys' affairs, and provided for her mother's upkeep in her will. Audrey's father, Joseph Rustin, left her mother when Audrey was just 6 years old. She saw him briefly when she was 10 and then had no more contact with him for 20 years. Even after finding him, she still found him to be emotionally disconnected. In spite of this, she provided for him for the rest of his life. Both had 3 major relationships and both had controlling husbands. Marilyn married James Doherty when she was 16 years old, in a marriage arranged to keep her out of the orphanage when her foster family moved out of state and couldn't bring her along. Their marriage ended in divorce when Jim wanted her to give up her dreams of stardom to be a housewife. Marilyn married Joe DiMaggio after a 2-year courtship, but their union lasted only 9 months. Joe was increasingly jealous. He told Marilyn what to wear, what film roles she could do, was resentful when she received more attention, and was rumored to have been both emotionally and physically abusive. However, after undergoing therapy, DiMaggio re-entered Marilyn's life and became one of her closest friends and allies. Marilyn married playwright Arthur Miller, but the marriage was difficult as Marilyn struggled to have children and became increasingly depressed. Arthur insinuated himself into her business affairs and contributed to the breakup of her production company. They divorced after 4 years of marriage. Audrey was married to Mel Ferrer for 12 years. He was said to be very controlling, keeping her phone number from managers and agents, telling her what films to perform in, and making business decisions for her. Rumors were so rampant that she even gave a magazine interview to dispel that her husband ran her career. Eventually, Ferrer was tired of his wife's fame overshadowing his own, and the couple divorced. Audrey married Andrea Dotti, an Italian psychiatrist, in 1969, and were married for 13 years. Andrea had frequent extramarital affairs, and Audrey stayed until she felt her son was old enough to cope with divorce. Audrey met actor Robert Walters in 1980, and although never married, they were together until her death in 1993. In Walters, Audrey finally had found the love and the companionship she needed, and they are considered one of the world's great love stories. Both suffered from bouts of depression. Marilyn Monroe famously dealt with depression going all the way back to her starlet days. After the death of her agent and lover Johnny Hyde, her acting coach found her unconscious in an apparent suicide attempt. Despite all her success, Marilyn was plagued by depression that culminated following several miscarriages and her divorce from Arthur Miller, with her spending time in the psychiatric unit of Payne Whitney Hospital. She did, however, work hard to try and overcome it by undergoing years of therapy to cope with what is now suspected to either be bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder. Audrey Hepburn's depression is less well known than Marilyn's, but was there nonetheless. She fell into deep periods of melancholia following her divorces and was often described as feeling lost. In an article from the 1960s, Tom Daley reported that Audrey attempted suicide twice, once trying to slit her wrists. Audrey's son Sean Ferrer has spoken about the deep sadness his mother harbored as a result of her early traumas during the war. Both had extramarital affairs with co-stars. During the filming of Let's Make Love in 1960, rumors were rampant of an affair between the film's co-stars, Marilyn Monroe and Yves Montand. Both were married at the time, Monroe to Arthur Miller and Montand to Simone Signoret. When filming wrapped, so did the romance. While Marilyn is often vilified for her relationships, Audrey's are less well known. During the filming of Sabrina, Audrey had an affair with her co-star, married father of three, William Holden. She was also rumored to have had an affair with her Two for the Road co-star, Albert Finney, during her marriage to Mel Ferrer. They both had dated John Kennedy at some point. When JFK was still a single senator, he dated Hepburn. Their relationship wasn't scandalous, nor was it serious. It was Monroe that brought the scandal, as she was Kennedy's mistress during his presidency. We all know about how she famously sang a sultry version of Happy Birthday to him at his birthday party. But just 1 year later, Hepburn was the star who was tasked with the singing to the president for his birthday. But no one remembers her much more respectable and demure performance. They both smoked. It's funny when we look back at the old movies and shows and see people smoking indoors constantly. When I see ashtrays in the armrest of the airplane, I'm shocked that people were allowed to smoke on airplanes. Can you imagine now sitting in a closed corridor of smoke? Anyways, smoking was popular in Hollywood, and almost all celebrities, mainly movie stars, smoked, and they smoked a lot. Don't forget that this was a time before major studies on health were done. They simply didn't know or didn't care about the health risks of smoking. And you can say that Audrey Hepburn was a smoker, to say the least. She was actually known to smoke upwards of 3 packs a day. Yeah, I also think that's a little much. Did Marilyn smoke? Yes, we can make guesses as to how heavily she smoked. Certainly she was photographed more without a cigarette than with one, but there is no doubt that she was more than just an occasional or social smoker. Both worked tirelessly for children's charities. Likely because of their own difficult childhoods, both women had tremendous empathy for children and devoted much of themselves to helping them. But what made these women different? Women who grew up with Marilyn and Audrey's films were under the shared assumption that Marilyn was made for men, and thus was the enemy, while Audrey's was perceived as elegant and one of the girls. Women felt competition from Marilyn, while Hepburn, with her different gamine body figure and childlike attitude, seemed to shake up the standards. With her poise and manners, society deemed her to be a great role model for girls. However, actresses ended their lives and careers differently. On August 5, 1962, 3 months after her birthday, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her bedroom. The sudden death of a superstar came as a shock to the entire country. Most Americans were not aware of all the drama that took place in the life of Marilyn. Her death has given rise to many questions and mysteries. The Secret Service seized records of Marilyn's phone calls that night. Whom she called is still unknown. The psychotherapist at first claimed that he arrived a little after midnight, but the police were called only around 4 a.m. What happened for several hours in Marilyn Monroe's bedroom? Who else visited the actress's house that night? Bobby Kennedy officially spent the entire day of August 4th in San Francisco. However, there were several witnesses who claimed to have seen the president's brother that day in LA. Why then did he lie about his location? There was a hypothesis that the Secret Services and the Kennedy brothers were behind the death of Marilyn. Because of this, in the 80s they even resumed the investigation into the death of the actress. However, no evidence of violent death was found. After 1976, Hepburn chose to devote more time to her family and acted only occasionally in the following decades up until 1993. Upon returning from Somalia to Switzerland in late September 1992, Hepburn developed abdominal pain. In Los Angeles in early November, medical tests revealed a rare form of abdominal cancer. On the evening of January 20th, 1993, Hepburn, at the age of 74, died in her deep sleep at home. So, what was Marilyn's secret? Why was she a Hollywood icon and the whole world was crazy about her? An important part of Marilyn's sex appeal and charisma was the unique manner of movement and speech. Directors in various movies actively used her famous swaying gait. Marilyn's voice and timbre were completely unique. She spoke softly. At the beginning of her career, this was a big problem. She had to work with a voice coach for a long time to learn how to speak louder and project. But in the end, her voice became a calling card. And perhaps the most important aspect of Marilyn's attractiveness was the innocent or even naive expression on her face. Combined with her curvy sex appeal, this gave a unique effect. It attracted the male part of the audience and at the same time did not repel the female. So, what was Audrey's secret? Audrey was an EGOT winner. EGOT stands for the Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony Awards. How did she become the third greatest female screen legend from the classical Hollywood cinema and was inducted into the International Best Dressed List Hall of Fame? Audrey Hepburn was elegance personified. Her wistful expressions, her svelte figure, her impish charm captivated millions and made her one of the greatest movie actors and fashion icons of all time. The quality that made Audrey Hepburn a great actress were above all also those that made her a great person. Her genuine compassion and strength of character. Ultimately, it's not the roles she played that made her an enduring cultural icon, but who she was. Audrey Hepburn was a fashion icon who brought a new standard of elegance and refined beauty to society through her unique and timeless style. She helped to revolutionize fashion and popularize a new approach to personal style that is still celebrated today. Both are indisputable icons deserving of admiration. Both were great actresses who worked hard to achieve stardom. Both overcame trauma and heartache from childhood to be beloved by the whole world. Both had scandals that should be far outweighed by their kindness, generosity, and charity work. Both are the biggest female movie stars of the 20th century and maybe of all time. Both had the most iconic moments in film history. Their legacy should be their contributions both to film and the world, not competing to see which one is somehow more worthy of respect and admiration. They are both admirable women and deserving of their icon status. After almost 60 years, it is absolutely right to say that the legendary blonde and brunette were something more than just famous actresses.